There are moments in each of our lives when we feel lonely, despite the presence of people around us. But the most terrible loneliness is staying with someone who doesn't understand you. In such a situation, regardless of the number of people around, you still feel lonely, misunderstood and invisible. We often think that being surrounded by people, we automatically avoid loneliness. But in fact, if there are people in our environment who do not understand us and our feelings, we can still feel lonely. In such a situation, even in a crowd, we remain unnoticed and misunderstood, and this creates a feeling of deep emptiness. What is total loneliness? This is when a person without other people around does not see a way to live, when he sees the meaning of his life in another person or in interaction with other people. And if suddenly he finds himself alone as a result of a breakup of a relationship or for other reasons, his whole life becomes meaningless. He does not understand what to do next. What should he live for? What is the meaning of life? Where does the feeling of loneliness come from? When a child is born, leaving the inner warm protected world of his mother, he finds himself in the unknown and becomes very scared. After all, a lot of unfamiliar sounds appear: the air temperature, illumination, and color change. There are a lot of strangers around, and the only familiar voice, familiar body and smell is mom, and the voices of those people who were with mom during pregnancy. The child calms down only next to his mother. After all, he had entered an unfamiliar world, and only his mother is familiar to him. She's his only island of safety. Then the child begins to recognize the world around him and to recognize himself. After all, at the very beginning, he is afraid even of the manifestations of his own body and his own screams. He flinches at the wave of his own hands. He gradually begins to get acquainted with his body. He learns to manage it, to find out his capabilities, his emotions, and so on. And for the normal development of a child, it is very important to have close, warm human relations with parents or other significant adults. It is important for him to have a reliable rear, that very island of safety, in the form of adults, so as not to be afraid for his life, but to move forward. But it so happens that the parents themselves are not yet mature, and then they unknowingly pass these injuries on to their child. And it happens that a child cannot feel safe in his family and be a full-fledged person. They don't broadcast to him that he is valuable. His needs and emotions are not interesting to adults. They ignore or reject them. When he manifests himself, he does not receive approval or acceptance in response, but he is shouting, neglect, and may even be in danger for his manifestations when they try to shut him up, demand that he behave quietly and not shine. It happens that a child is treated as a function that needs to be done, and no one is interested in what the child himself feels, thinks, and what he wants. And then a person grows up without a sense of inner value. He doesn't know himself. He gets used to living in order to please others, to fulfill the requirements of being good for others. He knows all about other people's expectations, their needs, but has no idea what he wants. He does not know how he feels, does not understand who he is, he has no goals of his own in life, and he does not see his future. And then life really becomes meaningless, because if there is no other person worth living for, then why live? Loneliness with uncomprehending people is the loss of one's identity. We begin to feel inferior and wrong because our feelings and thoughts do not resonate with others. This can lead to a loss of self-esteem and self-acceptance, which further aggravates our situation. There is a loss of emotional connection and support. This condition creates a feeling of uselessness. When we stay with those who do not understand us, we often lose the meaning and purpose in life. We don't see the perspective and we don't feel that our lives matter. This can lead to depression, despair, and loss of motivation. Loneliness with uncomprehending people makes us think about the meaning of our lives and look for new opportunities for growth and development. Surrounded by people who don't understand us, we lose the freedom to be ourselves. We often feel compelled to play a role in order to be accepted. We hide our true feelings and thoughts so as not to provoke criticism. This limits us and does not allow us to reach our potential. So gradually we lose the opportunity to grow and develop. We don't get feedback and we can't learn from our mistakes. Loneliness with uncomprehending people leaves us in place, not allowing us to become better and open up. When we are in relationships with people who do not understand us, we lose joy. We cannot share our experiences and experience real happiness with them. It makes us unhappy and dissatisfied. We gradually lose faith in ourselves and in other people, starting to doubt our abilities and that we can achieve our goals. We also lose faith in other people because they are unable to understand and support us. Being alone with uncomprehending people destroys our trust, which makes life even more difficult and unpleasant. When we stay with those who do not understand us, we lose the opportunity to love and be loved. We can't fully open up and let other people into our lives. Loneliness is a subjective feeling. Throughout their lives, people face different manifestations of loneliness, and everyone experiences them in their own way. 3 approaches to the definition of loneliness can be conditionally distinguished. They depend on a person's worldview. Philosophical. Loneliness is an existential given. It just exists, and this state cannot be changed in any way. For people with existential views on life, it manifests itself in the understanding of separation from other people, the impossibility of complete fusion with another person. For example, I will be left alone, because one day my loved ones will die. Social. Loneliness is longing for another person. Unlike the existential approach, the social problem of loneliness can be solved with the help of close relationships. The desire not to be alone is natural, because a person as a social being needs to belong to a group. Psychological. Loneliness is an opportunity to be alone with yourself and replenish your energy resource. From this, 3 fundamental sources of loneliness can be distinguished: the literal absence of people around, physical or psychological isolation, unwillingness or inability to make new acquaintances, difficulties with building intimacy, including with oneself, that is, ignorance and misunderstanding of oneself. How to understand that I'm lonely? Usually people admit this to themselves quite openly. When they are alone, they feel anxious, they feel forgotten, abandoned, and devastated. But it happens that a person avoids the thought that he is lonely. At best, he does not want to return to a cold, empty apartment. At worst, he begins to ignore these feelings, convince himself that they do not exist. Yes, I'm fine alone. Or drown out, for example, alcohol or hanging out in questionable companies. To understand if you are lonely and how critical this feeling is for you, you need to analyze your behavior and thoughts and listen to the feelings that arise from them. When you come across philosophical statements like a person is born and dies alone, how do you feel? It is important to understand that there is nothing shameful about feeling lonely. It does not speak of you as an inferior and self-sufficient person. Everyone has a feeling of loneliness, and it's worth admitting it to yourself and working on it, rather than drowning it out. Ignoring the feeling of loneliness, as well as the long-term stress caused by it, can lead to anxiety disorders, depression, isolation, and other mental problems. Is it too bad that you can't stay alone? If you can't stay alone at all, don't understand what to do with yourself, are ready to go anywhere with anyone, just not to be alone, this is really a wake-up call. The feeling of loneliness can be sad, but it definitely shouldn't cause much anxiety and fear. You can cope with loneliness on your own. It is useful to develop a healthy attitude towards loneliness and learn to accept this condition. Reflection, exploring your interests, and talking with friends will help you find contact with yourself. Take a closer look at who is around you. Do these people hear you? Are they respectful of your feelings and thoughts? How do they communicate with you? Do you get joy from communication, or do you feel lonely among people? Maybe it's time to think about it and start changing something. The choice is always yours.